how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of Bach's chorale harmonizations. I apologize for the low energy today. I am feeling under the weather. There is something going around. Everyone in my house is sick and it is not good, but I decided I had just enough energy to make a video today. I was right on the cusp of just making a voiceless video and just temporarily uploading it to the channel to let you know that I was gonna take a little bit of a break to make sure I was okay, but after resting all day I did manage to get a second wind and stay on track. So we're going to try and get through this chorale and see how it goes. It is a relatively interesting one as we are continuing along with our journey through the St. John Passion. Today we're looking at Vater unser im Himmelreich, which translates to Our Father who art in heaven. All things considered, it's a fairly straightforward chorale. No real harmony here that is unconventional. For the most part, we do have a little bit of interesting harmony going on here towards the end of the first system, but all in all, I'd say the biggest points of contention here are where the modulations occur. Bach presents a number of modulation zones that I've been talking about more recently in comparison to videos past where it's come up, but still is definitely more of a concentration of chorale, or not chorale zones, modulation zones in like the videos from the last month. We're going to hop right into the analysis. I feel like the intro's going on for too long. We start on D minor, we end on D major, and there's one flat in the key signature, so I reckon we are in the key of D minor. We then go to A major in first inversion, C sharp, A, E, and A, which is our 5 chord with the passing 7th in the melody, and then we get D minor again, D, A, E, and F. This E is a 9/8 suspension over the bass. It's just our tonic triad again. Then afterwards we get our normative progression here that we've seen time and time again, E, G, C sharp, and G. That is 7/6 C sharp diminished over E. A little decorative tone here in the alto as well. This E is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it. And then we have F, D, A, and A, which is our tonic triad in first inversion, 1-7-6-1. Coincidentally, just like yesterday's chorale, we're going to see another version of this same principle of taking 2 chords on either end and bridging the distance between them with a chord, a diatonic step below them in first inversion. We'll see that later. But moving in towards our perfect authentic cadence, we have G, D, B flat, and F. Very interesting chord here. This is G minor 7, which is 4/7, a relatively unusual predominant chord. Typically, if we're going to see 4 chords, they're usually in first inversion. And they usually precede a half cadence. We typically get a 2 chord here, or maybe what's more interesting is the fact that it has a 7th. Typically 4 chords don't have a 7th in a cadential situation as far as Bach is concerned, but here we are seeing one. It's very interesting. But Bach tends to get contrapuntal in his cadences, so take all of these chords with a grain of salt. We also have a D here that turns into a non-chord tone, or a 4/3 suspension over the bass. We have A, C sharp, and E. Also with this G as well, so I'd make the argument that this is a 5/7 chord because the resolution also occurs at the same time as the tenor changing, which introduces that chordal 7th. And then we get D minor, D, F, A, and D, which is our tonic triad, perfect authentic cadence. Next phrase, maybe the most interesting phrase in the whole chorale, or maybe the phrase afterwards, but this is in contention for that title. We have a half cadence in the key of D minor, but we, in my opinion, go to the key of F major first. I think there's an argument to be made here that we do stay in the key of D minor throughout the entire phrase. I just can't help but hear this first half of the phrase in the key of F major. That's just what it sounds like to me, and maybe you can corroborate that or tell me whether or not it doesn't sound like that to you. But we start things off with another D minor triad, D, D, F, and A, just a bit of vocal rotation in the upper voices, and I think this is our 6th chord in the key of F. We then get an interesting series of chords here. We have A, E, and C, or sorry, C, A, E, and A, which is A minor in first inversion. That's 3, 6. So a bit of transitive harmony here, where we have 3 going, or 6 going against the grain. Typically 3 goes to 6, not vice versa, but Bach does this so frequently it makes me wonder whether or not, you know, transitive harmony or going a fifth away in either direction is just as valid as going down a fifth. The fifth sequence was kind of drilled into my brain in school, so I don't know, maybe I have a preconceived bias. But afterwards we have B flat, D, D, and G. That's G minor in first inversion, or 2, 6. This is the example. I thought it was later in the chorale. Here it is happening here, or some semblance of it happening here. We have A, C, E, and C, which is A minor in root position. Here we have 3, 6, 2, 6, 3. Very similar to what's happening here. 1, 7, 6, 1. Diatonic step below and separated by an inversion. But I think another really cool thing that happens here is this C is a chord tone, but I think also the quality of the chord changes, and this is what sort of brings together the idea of F major. We have C, C, E, and C, which is a 3 root 1/3 spelling that kind of spells a 5 chord that consists of chord tones from the previous chord. That's pretty unusual. I don't think we've encountered something like that before. But regardless, we do go to our F major triad, F, C, F, and A, which is our tonic triad, and also what I believe to be our pivot back to D major. It is now our 3 chord. And then after our 3 chord, we have some non-chord tones going on. Chromatic passing tone here in the tenor, passing tones in all 3 of the voices. And we get this passing idea of a diminished 7th chord over an F, which is a little unusual. Or maybe it's not necessarily unusual, it's more so the fact that we have a pedal and we can't really analyze the chord on the page, or I'm not going to put it on the page despite the fact the chord tones are there. It's just this F that throws a wrench in things, but do bear in mind the fact that there is this idea of a diminished chord linking the 3 and the next chord happening here, which is B flat, D, D, and F, which is B flat major in root position, and in the key of D major, that is 6. This is a bit of like a deceptive progression because we have the resolution happening the way it's supposed to here in the upper voices, but the bass introduces B flat, which is the 6th. But 3 wants to go to 6, so it's really what's going on in the upper voices that creates that deception, because if we omitted that, this would be a very normative progression, 3 going to 6. It's a cycle of falling fifths. Then we have A, C sharp, F, and F. Kind of a passing F augmented triad here, F, A, and C sharp, which is interesting. I wonder why Bach included an F in another voice. Looks like F is kind of being highlighted a lot over the course of these 3 beats, but I kind of look at this more like kind of a dominant sound, even though F is also being emphasized, but I'm not going to analyze anything here. Maybe there is a chord to be read here. I don't think the augmented triad is really contributing too much to the chord progression. You also have to be a little leery in cadential situations because Bach tends to get contrapuntal, and it's more about the general gist of getting to the dominant or getting to whatever chord is going to precede the final cadential chord. And because this is a half cadence, we really have this kind of three-ish chord going to B flat, D, E, and G, and where we could analyze this as 2, like a 2-4-3 chord, which would make sense after a 6 chord. I think it makes more sense that actually in the context of a half cadence, this is actually a 4-6, B flat, D, D, and G, which would make this a very typical Phrygian half cadence where there is a 2-4-3 chord in a half cadence. Typically there's not a 4, or rather there is a 4-6 chord not too far behind. And in half cadences that don't have a 2-4-3 chord, rather, it's a 4-6 chord that makes it the Phrygian half cadence. A, C sharp, E, and A is our 5 chord as well. It's not super important that you mark this as a Phrygian half cadence either. It's just something worth noting, the flat 6 going to the 5 in the bass. Okay, looking ahead, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D, or I guess more specifically D minor, even though we get this Picardy third here. But at the beginning of this phrase, I'm not 100% sold that we are still in the key of D minor, but I think as far as the analyses are concerned, I think maybe there's this idea of like D Dorian going on here, because we have the A, B natural, C, but it doesn't quite feel like we are in the key of C major either. It feels like we are getting a minor dominant here. I guess that sort of explains the sound. So we have this cross relation going from cadential chord to pickup of the next measure. So I analyzed it in the key of D minor. Maybe you have a different key analyzed for the beginning of this phrase, but we start things off with a minor dominant, A, C, E, and A, and typically, usually what I think is that the reason why we have a minor dominant is because the fifth of the chord, or sorry, not the fifth of the chord, the third of the chord ends up in the melody. However, in this case, we have the dichotomy of the leading tone here in the natural seventh as well. So there's this interesting dichotomy of the minor dominant, or 3 in the key of F major. We do have an F major chord going on here. It is quite possible that we do start this phrase in the key of F major as well, but the idea of a C dominant chord, right, C, G, E, and what would normally be B flat, is kind of or rather derailed by the fact that we have B natural here. So this would be a C major 7 chord over G, which takes away from the fact that this C chord would be the dominant of the F chord happening afterwards. I had to check and see if this was a typo, and this B natural is in fact correct. So either there's some D Dorian ideas going on here where the 7 chord of D Dorian would be a major 7th chord because of that raised 6th scale degree, or I'm overthinking it and this really just is a minor dominant. We are in the key of D minor here, and these opening chords just are more stable and don't make use of the leading tone. I mean, it's not like the leading tone is too far behind in the first place, so I'm just going to stick with the analysis that I have in my notes. We have a major dominant followed by a minor dominant, and then we have F, C, A, and C, which is F major in root position. That is a 3 chord, and this A is also a chord tone. And then we start to get melodic minor, more more tonal, straightforward normative progression here. We have F, B, natural, G, and D, which is, like I said, melodic minor. This would be G7 over F, which is 5-4-2. Then we have some passing tones going on in 3 of the voices as well, leaving us with E, C sharp, G, and E, which is C sharp diminished over E, or 7-6, and that goes to D minor, D, D, F, and D, which is our tonic triad in root position. Let me go ahead and rewrite that as well. I'm starting to see that 4 chord's taking up way too much real estate and causing everything to move over. But yes, a 4-7-1 progression. We have descending natural minor as well. Textbook melodic minor, where it goes raised in one direction and falls naturally. It's not always true, but in this case here it is true. This A is a chord tone, the C natural is a passing 7th, and then we get G, B flat, G, and E, which is E minor 7, or sorry, just E diminished over G, which is 2-6. We're getting ready for a cadence, so this would be a likely chord we would see, or 2-6-5. We know that Bach loves 2-6 chords and 2-6-5 chords. But then we go to G sharp, B, F, and D, which is G sharp fully diminished over, or that's actually just in root position. I'm so used to seeing chords inverted that it's just my default to say over something, but no, it's over its own root, which is redundant. But this would be 7 of 5, because G sharp's the leading tone to A, and A is our dominant, and then we get A afterwards after an anticipation in the alto, A, E, and C sharp, which is our 5 chord, and then we cadence on 1. And coincidentally, this cadencing on 1 turns into the dominant of the chord that we get next, and in sort of a similar fashion to the second phrase where we move to the key of F major and then we move to the key of the parallel minor. I think the same thing is sort of happening here. I think you can make an argument that the whole phrase is in the key of A minor, but the beginning of the phrase sounds so C major-like to me that I don't think modulations occur or some type of key change occurs until after we get the G sharp. That's just the way that I hear it. But we start things off with G, which in the key of, I guess also you could analyze this as 5 of 4, but then afterwards we do just get a regular old 4 chord, and I'm just going to say A minor. I think I hear this B natural as the chordal 7th, but it's actually just functioning like a 7/6 suspension over the bass, and this 4 is actually turning into 7, and we're just starting a cycle of falling fifths. This is not even necessarily a 3 chord. I suppose you could analyze it as 3/7, and I'll put that there because that's naturally what I hear, but we get 1/6 actually, A minor over C, and then we get B natural, A, B, and D, but this A is also an accent and non-chord tone, and what we get instead is G sharp over G sharp diminished over B, which is 7/6, and then we get A minor, A, E, and C, so we actually end up getting another 1/6, 7/6, 1 progression. So whether this is a direct modulation or a common chord modulation, or if the modulation actually starts with the D major chord, I honestly don't know. It did sound like we had a 5 going to 1, but that's largely, I think, because of the fact that this B carries over. We should actually be listening for this A, because this A is clearly the root of this chord. This is a very common device that Bach uses, this 7/6 suspension that also sort of turns into an outline where the first or the eighth notes on the downbeats become non-chord tones. Very, very common for Bach to do that. But as we're getting ready for our cadence, we have D, A, F, and B natural. That's B minor 7 flat 5, which is 2-6-5. You know that Bach loves 2-6-5 chords. And then we get some passing tones, or I guess we get a passing tone, a neighbor tone, and an anticipation, E, G sharp, E, and B, which is our 5 chord, E major, and then we get F, A, E, and A, so a bit of a deceptive progression here. I suppose you could call this, in the same fashion that we had this here, a 6/7 chord. I'll go ahead and be consistent with my analysis, but I do think this D is actually our chord tone. Exact same thing that's happening on the downbeat here of the phrase. This is, I think, is D minor in first inversion, which would be 2-6. Or sorry, not 2-6. We're not in the key of C major. I went back to that thought process that we started the phrase in C major, but I walked that back. This would be 4-6. So this is a deceptive progression through and through, from 5 to 4-6. Really, it's mostly just a prolongation of the idea because Bach wasn't ready to cadence yet. He cadences 3 beats later, or I guess 2.5 beats later. So he goes from 5 to 4-6, 5 going to 6 in the bass. That's a deceptive progression. And after our 4-6 chord, we get E, B, E, and G sharp. That's our 5 chord, E major, and then we cadence on A minor, A, C, E, and A, which is our tonic triad in root position. Okay, looking ahead, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of F major, but I think we go through C major first. I'm pretty convinced that we're in C major, at least up until we get this B flat, maybe even after the B flat. But starting things off, I think this A is a common chord. It's now our 6 in the key of C major, and then we get G, B natural, G, and D, which is our 5 chord G major with a passing 7th in the bass. And then we have E, C, G, and C, which is our tonic triad, C major in root position. This A is a non-chord tone, this F is a non-chord tone, this E is a chord tone, and then we get D, G, F, and B, which is G7 over D, 5-4-3, which is kind of just a substitute for B diminished, actually. You could look at this chord progression similar to the one that we had here, 7-6 versus 5-4-3. They're basically the same chord. If you looked at this G as a non-chord tone, I suppose you could analyze this as 7/6, but I don't know. The G is there. I think this is an interesting configuration. It's relatively uncommon, so I'm erring on the side of caution here and analyzing this as a G7 chord. Okay, moving ahead, we have C, G, E, and C, which we might be tempted to call a tonic triad, but I'm convinced actually that because of this passing B flat here, this chord is functioning like a secondary dominant, more specifically 5 of 4, because this B flat reveals that this C chord is going to resolve to F, and that C is functioning like a dominant, which you'd think it would. It goes, we have the F and we have the A here in the upper voices, but we have D and D here in the lower voices, which ends up giving us 2. D minor, so a deceptive progression in terms of F, but I do believe after this C chord in the key of F major, this D minor chord is now 6. I suppose you could analyze this C chord as like, 5 in the key of F and then call this D minor chord 6, but personally to me it sounds like this is an instance where the modulation occurs after the chromaticism, which actually in a roundabout way is just reintroducing the key signature. We've had chromaticism up until this point, and now we're getting back to the idea of D minor, which is 1 flat. But this is how I analyzed it. Like I said at the beginning, this is Bach presents an interesting situation here where there's a series of modulation zones. Like, is a modulation even occurring, or is the modulation happening at a particular point? That's what the zone sort of, the complexity of the modulation zone presents to us. It's like, where exactly is the modulation occurring? Is there an ideal place to analyze it? Some cases, yes. I feel like it's more accurate to just say that there is a modulation occurring, and wherever you choose to analyze it is indicative of the fact that there are multiple places it can be analyzed. For me, this is how I hear it, so that's how I'm going to mark it on the page. We also have a passing 7th in the bass here before we get B flat, D, F, and A. That is B flat, major 7, another 4/7 chord, just like how we had here, getting ready for our cadence. So there are some parallels here between the first and the first phrase and this phrase here as far as the cadence is concerned. 4/7 going to C, G, F, and G. We don't go to a 5/7 chord. This F is a 4/3 suspension over the bass, so this is more of it's just a regular 5 chord. And then we do get the resolution in a similar fashion, but we don't get a 7th here in the tenor, so it's just a regular 5 chord. And then of course we cadence on 1, F, A, C, and F, which is our tonic triad and root position. Okay, looking ahead, we end the chorale as we typically do with the perfect authentic cadence, and in the case of minor chorales, because the overall tonality of this chorale is D minor, we end on a major chord. I think in this case we have another modulation zone. You could say we just directly modulate to the key of D minor. I personally don't think we have any reason to say that we've moved to the key of D minor yet, because this chromaticism is just as applicable to the key of F major as it is to the key of D minor. We have F sharp, A, D, and A, which is D major over F sharp. That would be 5/6 of 2 in the key of F major. And then we get G minor, and this would be 5/6 of 2 because D is the dominant to G, and G is our 2 chord. And then we get 2 afterwards, of course, G, G, D, in B flat, with a passing 7th in the tenor. And I do believe this is where we go to D minor as well, because G minor is a shared chord between the 2 keys. 2 now becomes 4. And then we get C sharp, E, E, and A, which is our 5 chord in first inversion, A major over C sharp. And then we have a passing 7th in the melody before we get D, A, E, and A. We've seen something similar to this in the first phrase as well, this D minor chord with a 9/8 suspension over the bass. This C is also a passing 7th. Before we get B flat, D, D, and G, that is G minor in first inversion, 4/6. Passing tone in the bass again before we get C sharp, G sharp, B natural, D, and F. It's G sharp fully diminished 7th, which is a secondary dominant. 7/7 of 5. We've seen this before at the end of our third phrase as a predominant chord, as a substitution for I guess 4/7 because it's like melodic minor here with the G natural, or could be B flat could be used here for all intents and purposes. But anyways, afterwards we do get our 5 chord. This D is a 4/3 suspension over the bass, but still A, E, C sharp, and E still spells A major, which is our 5 chord. And of course we cadence on D major, D, F sharp, A, and D, which is our tonic major triad. Using that Picardy third, Bach often ends his minor chorales with a major triad. I feel like that's just a convention at this point. Bach very well could do it because he wants to end on an uplifting tone, but I feel like the general precedence is that major chords have a stronger sense of finality. At least that's the relationship that Bach had with major chords in cadential situations. That's going to wrap up today's chorale. That's about as much steam as I have in the tank for today. I am feeling very unwell, so hopefully this video did suffice. I think all in all, there were some nuances to this particular chorale that made analyzing a little bit of a trick. The chords themselves were not difficult to analyze, but marking modulations in certain places did present a unique set of challenges. You know, whenever you have modulation zones, especially a number of them, marking modulations, you do get kind of wary, like, okay, is there something that I'm missing here? But I guess what's most important is to understand the fact that we have a chorale that has sort of its own unique profile, and sometimes it breaks norms, and analysis should reflect that, which I hope my analysis did. But all in all, modulation zones, modulating over the 3, the 1 versus the 3 is a very typical thing that we do. Wasn't really a lot of commonality between the common chords that were used today. In fact, I think there were no 2 situations where the same common chords were used between keys. Maybe that's an interesting aspect of the chorale. But if you're interested in following me along on this journey, you can subscribe to the channel, you could hit the notification icon, you can like the video if you enjoyed the content. I have hundreds of videos scheduled in the content pipeline because there's you know, close to 200 more chorales to analyze left in the journey. This is episode 239, so there's quite a few chorales left for me to analyze. And if you like Bach, if you like analysis, you'll get your fix here, and I'd love to have you along on the journey. But other than that, I want to thank you so much for watching the video. If you got this far, thank you so much for supporting the channel by watching the video. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.